our speaker today, Scott Morris, comes to us from the Midwest or the West, and he's been in Midwest, right?
From Iowa.
From Iowa, and has been in our community for about a year and a half. He is deeply interested and has some expertise in alternative currencies, and he's going to explain what that means today. But he was an advisor or consultant to the Ithaca Hours board, and more recently has been involved in a different approach to currencies, and also has been affiliated with and helpful to the Building Bridges program. This is one in this approach is one in a series that Fred and I wanted to support the Building Bridge agenda for eliminating poverty. So at the beginning of this presentation, Scott may well talk to us about the model for eliminating poverty that Kirby Edmonds has been developing. Kirby was going to come here and introduce Scott also, but probably spring weather or my lack of giving him a reminder, one thing or another, Kirby hasn't arrived yet. So I'm doing the introduction, and welcome Scott. Looking forward to this.
Hi everybody. Good morning. Really happy to be here. This is an intimate group. I like keeping it intimate, so if I say something and you don't understand, stop me. I'm always happy to do this. And I recognize I'm a very young person in the room, and I really appreciate that. So thank you for lending me your ears and tolerating my young whippersnapperness.
I make us feel older.
Well, I love having a cross-generational dialogue. I think it's really, really important because, folks of your generation have so much knowledge that my generation could really benefit from. And I think that's really underappreciated in the current state of things. So anyhow, this is actually a slideshow that I delivered at TEDx Ithaca College a couple of weeks back. Does everybody know what TED is? TED Talks. Anybody not heard of TED Talks?
Yeah.
Cool. So it seems like everybody knows what TED Talks. You don't know what TED? Yeah. All right. TED was a conference annually held, and they'd bring A-listed speakers, and it was on the theme of technology, education, or design. And so people would have, it was a formatted talk at 18 minutes, and it was just high quality value, really profound insight, whatever it was that you wanted to bring attention to. And so TED eventually created TEDx, where the X indicates that it's an independently organized event where anybody could take that 18-minute talk format and certain branding guidelines and deliver a TED-esque event in their own community. So I was invited to speak up there. I applied and made it, and so I delivered this talk, and the YouTube video should come out Tuesday. So I'm really excited about that.
What would we look for on YouTube to find it?
I'd be happy to pass the link out. That way you don't have to go look for it.
Thank you.
That's always easier. But yeah, I would typically go on YouTube and search the person and TEDx, and it'll pop right up. So, like Bob said, I'm new on the local currency scene, pretty much. I was actually featured in a documentary called Money and Life, which is also on YouTube. You can go YouTube, Money and Life. It's a feature length, it's 86 minutes, and really goes through step by step the awakening process that's happening right now, collectively in society, around money as a social issue and as a human technology, because we're all familiar with the phrase that money doesn't grow on trees, right? That money isn't a part of the natural world. It is kind of the epitome of a human abstraction. We invent it. We're the ones who create it. And because of that, we actually have the power to control all of the rules that determine how it works, how it's brought into being, what it does while it's out there in the world, and then how it's taken out if that's something that's important. More and more people are realizing that the way that the money system today is structured is at the core of our social crises, our environmental crises, as well as our economic crises. And that we're not up against class warfare so much as we're up against mathematics and physics And so, these are just kind of some of the baseline realizations that the film will go into, and I don't want to spend, forever delving into today, but I'm just going to kind of touch on some of the spirit and heart of what I have come to understand money as and how I think it works. Yes, sir?
Yesterday I saw something online that resembles what you're describing now. This whole story about how money was introduced and changed the whole way we are in the world. Something like that.
Yeah. There's more and more people are starting to cover it. Originally I was introduced to that discussion through a political road. I did a study abroad in Japan when I was studying at the University of Alabama. That's where I got my bachelor's. I went to Japan for a year. When I came back, I was really motivated to get active in the world, having spent 5 weeks of that year backpacking around China and Southeast Asia. I really came face to face with real poverty, people living on less than $1 a day. And something in me just whispered, if you can't deliver a new way of being, a new way of making life work to these people who are at the bottom of the bottom, you're not doing it right. Because people have that power to lift themselves out of those situations. It's often just a matter of getting the rules of the game in such a way that that's something that's actually possible. So anyhow, I came back and I found myself very politically activated by Ron Paul. I campaigned for Ron Paul in Iowa. I had a choice. I had a really, really crazy choice. I could either go and vacation in Italy, or I could go to the frozen, plains of Iowa and go knock on doors for Ron Paul. And I went to Iowa, and I never regretted it. And through that, I started hearing about the Federal Reserve and fractional reserve banking and how we need honest money and all this stuff, and found myself into the core of Libertarian HQ at the Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama. And I really enjoyed it. It's a lot of cool people. It was a hip place to be. And Ron Paul's coming, Judge Napolitano's coming, Peter Schiff. He's since not really been doing so well in the public eye, but anyway, he was still pretty cool then, and a number of other people there. And I just realized that wasn't really, their solution for the money problem is silver and gold and copper, and hard metals. Honest money, sound monetary policy, these are their keywords and code words for copper, silver, gold. And there's something to be said for that, but logistically, for 7 billion people on the planet, there's just not enough of that stuff to go around, right? And even if you break it into little micro fractions and stuff, how are they going to get access to it to begin with, especially if we're going in different ways. So anyhow, all that's just the way that I got involved, and I was like, we've got to do something different. There's got to be a better way. How can we do this? And I opened my mind up again and I said, I don't know anything. What are the things that people have already tried? And that was when I discovered Ithaca Hours and time banking. And chambers have their own internal barter systems and the whole barter industry and all this stuff. And so we started digging into the mechanics of how those things work and created our own currency system that we piloted out there in Fairfield, and it was called the Hero Rewards Program. We created a currency that supported people doing volunteerism or sustainability. People would go volunteer at sustainability-related events. We'd give them a unit called a merit, and they could take that merit to a local business and get a special reward deal. Right? That was buy one, get one free coffee, buy a large pizza for the price of a small, whatever. That was how that worked. And so as a result of that, I found myself in Money in Life. And, long story short, found myself here in Ithaca. Here we are. So, people and planet, putting people and planet before paper wealth. That's the theme of this talk. And if you would please click for me, Jim. Or maybe hit the right arrow. There we go. So, what is money? This is an important question for us to ask, just so that we can have a common set of language. You might ask an economics professor this at IC or Cornell, and they're likely to tell you It's a store of value, it's a medium of exchange, it's a unit of account. I mean, that's familiar, right? Maybe that is familiar, and that's kind of what comes to mind. That's not actually what money is, though. And that's what money does. It helps us exchange, it lets us save, and it tells us how much we have in our checking account and in our savings account. But that's not at the core essence of it. I think that Bernard Becker here, who's a leading thinker in this field, has this definition. It's a pretty commonly agreed upon definition within people who do this work. That is an agreement within a community, any kind of community. That community doesn't have to mean geographically constrained either. It could be a global community, people who share a value, people who care about sustainability, people who like, technology as trust, and referencing Bitcoin here. Or to use something as a medium of exchange. There we go. And if you click for me, Jim. It's kind of the water to our fish, right, in our experience. We live our entire lives in it. We're born into this money system. We die in this money system. It pervades everything. We breathe it in, we spend it out. It's something that shapes so many choices in our life. But rarely do we stop and say, what is this stuff that I live in that motivates so much of what I do and can do and can't do? If you could, please. Another metaphor is the circulatory system. It's Tom Greco's quote from Money and Life. Blood carries nutrients to all parts of the body, and the purpose of the monetary system is to carry value to where it's needed. And it's funny when you start looking at the real value flow versus the money flow, you recognize that money actually flows in the opposite direction of real value. Money is just a surrogate claim to future real value. But anyway, I don't want to get too abstract. Jim, please. There we go. So this word currency. You ever thought about it? Currency. It's all about seeing a flow state, seeing a current. If you click, Jim. It's all about flow. And flow is a very universally observable pattern in the world, in the universe. Any kind of system that has flow has two nodes, two polarities, two extremes, one positive, one negative, one north, one south, however you want to frame them. But one place you have relative abundance, charge of some sort, and then on the other hand you have relative scarcity. And that flow is all about that abundance moving to that scarcity and then resetting somehow. So you've got abundance on one hand, scarcity on the other, and this intermediary arc. Three core elements here. Click, please. So earlier we looked at these functions and how money allows us to exchange right now in the present, and I can store up that value from the past, and I can quickly relate how this goes down. I have a little bit more time than I was planning on for today, so we can delve into this a little bit more deeply. I have my skills. I take these skills out into nature. I discover resources. Intermix my skills and my time with those resources, and I come up with a product. It's a coffee cup, a fancy new payments app on my phone, or a bow and arrow, whatever. I can bring that product to my community and offer it into the market, right? We can exchange that store, and that has my value in it. It's embedded in it because I created it. I made that happen. I made that possible. And I can exchange that for whatever I want to. I can barter it directly for some other good or service that I'm looking for, or I could, as we tend to default to today, go to money. Because money is that intermediary. It's that oil in our economic engine. It eases the friction of exchange. Barter seems like this ideal world, but it's actually very inconvenient because you have to want my bow and arrow. I have to want your rice. and we have to want those things at the same time. Those are three big hurdles, three big barriers to doing barter exchanges. So even in barter exchanges these days, they will have a digital tracking system where they have barter money that just lubricates that friction. I like the lubrication friction thing, and that hang on to that. Make a bookmark there, because we'll come back to it when it comes to local money and why local money is particularly useful. So I get that money for my stuff, and then I buy what I need. Minimo exchange happening in the present right now. But I don't have, I bought everything I need to buy for now, so I'm going to throw some in my savings account. That's when money goes and stores value from the past into my savings account. So I can call upon that original value that I had intermixed with that product, I can call upon it again from the past into my Minimo exchange in the present and exchange it. And the unit of account underlies all of that. It tells me how much I have stored value, how much I have immediately available, so on. What we have not asked in this framework, we've got these three things, but it does not speak to anything about what money does for future human behavior and how money as a system of incentives drives human behavior. And this is a really important question for us to ask and to understand and to answer and become very skillful at answering if we want to start to shift the winds that, fill the sails of our social boat. Click, please.
Scott,
Yes.
it just struck me that in terms of having a president be picked, one who would talk about what you're talking about with money, and I don't know exactly how to say this, but it sounds like a great presidential thing to bring your bring something out.
Thank you. I do hope that at some point in the future I'll be able to work on the national policy level. But I think it's really important that we focus on the community level so that we can demonstrate that these principles in action can really deliver some incredible benefits. So we'll get to that a little later on after we've kind of set the scene, and then we can talk more about what's going on here today, because I think it's very, very exciting. And there's only a few people who really realize how exciting it is. And so I'm looking forward to sharing a little more about that. So this is something I find myself as a personality bringing into this discussion uniquely. There are other people who speak to this in certain regards, but I really call a lot of attention to this point, this future function of money, in a way that even others in the community currency field haven't done as strongly. Anyway, they're not as emphatic about it. So money does, it's a way that we vote, right? And we, in shop local campaigns, it's all like keep our local shops here, keep our local economy thriving, keep, there's some places like, keep Austin funky or something like that. It's all about, keeping the local lifeblood flowing. And, when you shop at a local business, you're in effect voting and saying, I want a future with more local businesses in it than I do with more Walmarts. A future with more Walmarts and more Amazons. And every time you make that purchasing decision, you're casting that vote all over again. The way that we invest our money, there's a $3 or $4 trillion marketplace now for socially responsible investments. People who are saying, I want to invest my money in ways that are consistent with my values, so that I'm not undermining the future that I say that I want. If I say I want more renewable energy, but all of my real investment capital is in coal production, coal plants, that doesn't make sense. That's a direct conflict with myself. I'm fighting myself there. And also the availability credit, same sort of function. Incentives and reward schemes. This is easy, right? This is going over to Gimme and getting a cup of coffee and get your stamp, right? And you want to go back the next time and get the next stamp. Because eventually you get a free cup of coffee. How about that? Very simple, but that is a currency. That is a loyalty currency. And it's affecting your behavior. It's affecting your choice as to which coffee shop you want to go to. And you default to Gimme because, well, I'm only a couple stamps away from the free coffee. Same underlying functionality, operating on a much larger scale than the prior points. So there are many different types of money. This is something that we're going to have to confront moving forward. We have time-based systems, local and regional systems, business systems, loyalty. Who's got a frequent flyer mile account? Right? Has that ever occurred to you that you might be using a complementary currency, a community currency? Because that's exactly what frequent flyer miles are. You know, they're created by virtue of you flying from point A to point B. They're just poof, created. And then you can redeem those for a empty seat on an airplane, or now a cheaper hotel rate, a cheaper car rental rate, some luggage, all kinds of stuff are now available for frequent flyer miles. And in fact, this is one of the largest untapped pools of community currency in the world. We've got billions of frequent flyer miles, and they're kind of trapped in the airline sector and these other things that are starting to get onto those lists. Imagine if you could buy your coffee at Gimme with frequent flyer miles. Wouldn't that be amazing? It's not too far off in the future. Reputation currencies. The reputation economy is like being an eBay seller and people's ratings of you and your trustworthiness and how you show up and do business and how people rate that. And then you've got this relatively new cryptocurrency space. Who here has heard of Bitcoin? So impressed. Okay, so Bitcoin has been getting a lot of press recently. It's this new digital currency. It's a decentralized system, which means that no central authority controls it whatsoever. It's a system that is owned and maintained by its users. And it's last year it went over $1,200 to one Bitcoin. So once it started getting over $1,000 to a Bitcoin, which people laughed at, and it's just so ridiculous that this just string of ones and zeros effectively could have that high of a value. It did, mostly driven by speculation. Not saying it's actually worth that. This is in effect Bitcoin acts as a digital gold. I'm coming. So it was driven that high in price just by speculators coming into the market. And again, it has no intrinsic value, and there are many system design flaws in Bitcoin that I think are fatal. That unless something is changed in the core and done soon, that Bitcoin is already on its way out the door. I think it'll stick around because people have invested quite a lot of money into it and they won't let it go. But practically and functionally, I don't think that it's going to be anything that really is so transformative that it won't end up being marginalized. Yes, ma'am?
What happens if the people who are could buy in, don't? Tompkins Trust sent out a letter to every single person who belonged to the trust company. And I do read my name. And so it had this program called True Values, so that every single time I used my credit card, I accumulated points. And they would let me know how many points I had accrued. And they did have a catalog, but I called up. I mean, it was an online catalog. But I called up and I found out where I could cash in my points. And I found out that one of the places was Best Buy. Now, I wanted a laptop. But when I found out that Best Buy, was open to me, I needed a cell phone and, I needed other things too. So I have all these gift cards. I mean, they just kept coming like mail. So I went to Best Buy and I got a cell phone and I got hundreds of minutes, and then eventually I got a wireless phone, and I got a radio, and I got a phone for my intercom. I mean, it was just like that, and I still have the files. And, you know, they were fine. Well, one day I get in the mail a letter from the trust company telling me that they're discounting, that they're giving up the program. So, I mean, I was so disappointed. I called up, and he said, nobody, oh, and I would tell people in town, I have this program, and I get all these free gifts. And they'd say, what? What bank do you go to? And I said, the trust company. Well, we do too. And so I said to the man, well, why are you just, discontinuing the program? He said, because we didn't have participants. And it wasn't cost effective. Well, we'll come up with something else. I said, well, that's not fair. I read my mail, and I used your program. So now I'm out.
Yeah, that's...
So, I mean, it is one of those things. Some of these big businesses, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, is there
He's going to answer questions afterwards.
Probably better,
Okay.
Well, I appreciate you bringing it out, and that is a problem that does happen. I mean, it's more of a marketing problem than currency system problem, but
It's more a people problem.
yeah, well, it's definitely unfortunate. So, Bob, would you click us through the next slide, please? So, you guys probably recognize that one on the top left. Paul Glover did something really magical here in the early 90s. I mean, really magical. And I know that, people in the community have their own opinions about it, but people all around the world heard about what happened here. People from all around the world came to Ithaca to see what had happened here. This brought policymakers on their way to DC. It brought central bankers, to come and check out what was happening here, because it was totally novel. Now, that's not to say that was the first local currency, by any means. I mean, there's been tens of thousands, millions of them even throughout history, because that used to be the way that currencies happened. And we even in the 1930s, there were many communities that created their own local currencies just because the national economy was in the tank, right? And people still had to make life happen. So people reinvent money. That's something we do. When we're deprived of money, we'll reinvent it. That will happen. Whether we all gravitate to, say, salt as our medium of exchange, or it's shells, or whatever, heads of cattle. Money can be anything, as long as we just, again, agree to use it as a medium of exchange. That's all that's required for money. So this one here is the Bristol pound. That is a live system today in Bristol in the UK. This is what's called a transition currency. Who's heard of the transition movement? Have I heard of the transition movement? Got one, okay. So the transition movement came out of Totnes in the UK. A fella by the name of Rob Hopkins started creating an organization and a movement around kind of an intellectual pincer attack, a 1-2 punch of peak oil and climate change as a motivating force to get people to change their behavior, to at least reevaluate their behavior in their lives and in their communities. Because those are the two things that they said, just, forecast the end of cheap energy economy, right? Energy is going to get more expensive, so on and so forth. We should go ahead and start addressing those issues now so that we can lessen pain in the future.
Fossil fuels, yeah.
Right, so, power down by getting off of fossil fuels, get more efficient in terms of the energy that we do use and how it's used, and focus on local food, reducing our food mileage, things like this, all kind of transition values. So they started creating local regional currencies to support that ethos, that value set. And Bristol in particular is supported by the technology that I'm intending to bring here to Ithaca. It's created out of by the Coin Foundation, QOIN, Coin in Amsterdam. And that's bank-grade secure community currency technology. Not only do you have paper bills, but you can actually send a text message and pay somebody. Easy as text messaging. Who texts in here? Anybody send text messages?
No. We're too old.
I'm surprised though, because a lot of people, you know, I send text messages to my grandmother.
I did it once.
Right. So it didn't kill you. That's good. All right. So then the one here on the bottom left is a very interesting model. It's called the Virgil out of Austria. And this is a very interesting one. After World War II, you know, you might remember that Austria had some significant economic challenges. You know, they had a hyperinflationary currency where, you know, they're like literally wheelbarrowing around money, right? How ridiculous is that? Wheelbarrowing around money, taking it from when you get paid in the wheelbarrow, take it over to market as quickly as possible.
World War I. Is that after World War II as well?
It was after World War I, you're right. Yeah, 'cause I think this is the 30s as well.
Yeah.
So the Virgil here was created in this region, and you can see that there's a little stamp right here. And these, you'll notice that there's 12. You might have figured out there for the months. Every month, you'd have to go pay to get a stamp on there to keep that note active, keep it live. And you could bring in like 11 notes and trade it in for 10 stamps, right?
Wow.
So they would take them out. Now this actually acts like a negative interest rate. There's a word for it called demurrage. So it's a demurrage currency. And doing that completely flips the incentives of positive interest rates as we know them today on their head. And so instead of being rewarded and incentivized for hoarding money, you're rewarded and incentivized for pushing that, circulating it as fast and as quickly as possible so that you can translate that to real value. You know, so I can get the goods and services that I need, and I can work on my property and improve my house and stuff. This is not the first of these currencies, nor will it be the last. You know, many people think Bernard and another friend of mine, Stefan, have done research into what's called the Central Middle Ages, when most of Europe's cathedrals were built. And they have a pretty strong hunch that it was these kinds of currencies that allowed the communities to achieve such a state of fulfillment and sustenance that building those huge things was even possible. I mean, because they look at other cultural factors like, you know, how many people are, you know, of a faith kind of belief system and are going to church regularly, and how many people are doing this, and really nothing else changes over time except the availability of this kind of money. This one right here from Curitiba in Brazil is actually just a bus token. It's just a bus token. Like Ithaca, they have a pretty underutilized bus system. This is a little while back. There's a governor in place by the name of Jamie Lerner. And they had slums that were totally covered in garbage. And they couldn't get the garbage collection back into the slums because they didn't have hard enough roads to hold the garbage trucks or whatever. So they couldn't get back in the slums to clean the trash. And the people in the slums couldn't get down to the city because they couldn't afford the bus. And the buses pretty much are running empty. Doesn't make any sense. So you got the brilliant idea of recognizing, you know, all those abundance, scarcity. How can we make this go round? Right. We'll give bus tokens to the people living in the slums for pre-sorted bags of trash. How about that? And so what they found out was that the kids in the slums would go and pick the hillsides clean of the garbage, get the bus tokens, give them to their parents, who would take the bus into the city to get employment to the benefit of everybody.
Wow.
The program was so successful that they recreated the mechanism, you know, 3 or 4 times over for fishermen in the bay. If they went and fished and they caught fish, they were their fish. If they went and caught garbage out of the bay and they'd turn in the garbage, they'd get bus tokens, which opened up the bay for more fish, right? Fantastic stuff. They even did baskets of food. They had a lot of food. So baskets of food for keeping your kids in schools. So after they implemented a number of these, they had around 70% of all households who were participating in one of these programs or another. And then Curitiba ends up having something to the effect of 40% higher income per household than the rest of Brazil. And you know, they win all kinds of awards from the UN for, you know, sustainable city design and things like this. It was recognized work, and he ends up moving up, clearly benefited his political career. If you click through the next slide, please. There's a lot of these. A lot of these currencies. You'll see the blue merit that I mentioned over there. That was from our second pilot, the one that's in Hero Rewards, or that's in Money and Light. And we've got Ithaca, we've got Philadelphia, we've got Calgary in the UK, We've got Brixton, a neighborhood in London. We've got Madrid. We've got other places in Spain. You'll see some Japanese over there. We've got Japan. This one in particular is interesting because it's backed by rice. Really backed currency. It's very, very cool stuff. And then you'll see, you might notice that's an autumn leaves note up there for $10 in books. That's a currency backed by books right there. It's just a gift certificate, but then again, that's all money ever really is anyway. If you click us through, please. So, one thing that I'm promoting in applying this understanding of money is becoming very consciously selective of how we interact with money. And not only the kinds of monies that we use, but how we use them. Because anytime this use equals approval kind of thing, anytime you use the money, you're actually giving tacit approval to everything that happens within that money system. And so, to illustrate this, I had a woman who came on my Facebook profile when I posted about buying some Bitcoin. I bought a tenth of a Bitcoin at a time when I thought it was a great time to buy. And since then it's come down. What are you going to do? These are the risks you take. But she was like, oh my goodness, Scott, how could you do this? I had so much more faith in you, I'm so disappointed. How can you use a currency that supports, drug trafficking? There's the famous reputation thing that came out around Bitcoin was they had this service called the Silk Road, where you could go and, hypothetically, turned out to be false, anonymously buy anything you wanted to. So you could order drugs over the internet. So that gave the whole sphere a bad reputation, but again, that's just one portion, and surprise, surprise, the FBI went and shut it down and confiscated all the Bitcoins. So just don't make Bitcoin guilty by association with Silk Road. So, how can you support this currency that supports all these bad things? And I really felt for her. I could see where she was going with that. And it was like, okay, all right, that's what she's seeing there. She's got the whole Silk Road thing going on. But it's not really any different than dollars. Think about all the things that happen in U.S. dollars. All the arms trafficking, all the human trafficking, all the war making. All happens in dollars. Now, we still use dollars because, frankly, we're required to by law. We're not allowed to not use dollars. Effectively, you got to pay taxes, and you got to pay taxes in dollars. Believe it or not, that's the core reason why you want dollars, always, because you got to pay taxes in dollars. If you didn't have to pay taxes in dollars, your desire for dollars would go down significantly. So that's the power of a pull force in a currency system. It's rather potent, especially when it's backed by the state. So anyhow, when you create new currency systems, these alternative currency systems, you're allowed to determine the value set that goes into its use and what it promotes, what sectors of society can benefit. And you can do this, it's called the screening effect, right? The same thing happens in investments. So we'll talk about investment here for a little bit. You can have a negative screen where it says, don't invest my money in arms dealers. Don't invest my money in coal. Don't invest my money in GMOs. That's a negative screen. It says, these are the things I do not want my money in. Everything else is fair game. Then you can have a positive screen where you cut out all this other stuff in the middle. And you say, do invest my money in renewable energy. Do invest my money in local renewable food. Do invest my money in all these other things, in water infrastructure, whatever it is. That's a positive screening. So you can do the same thing with a new currency system by saying we don't support these things, we do support these things. If you want a world that looks more like this, come with us. Use this stuff. It'll make that stuff happen by default, because that's the direction that it's pointed in. The difference, of course, is that awareness of the differences between the traditional money system and these new money systems, and how those values can come into play. And look, not everyone has to understand it. You just need to use it. It's So this isn't something you have to have a full grokking understanding of in order to make the full benefit a reality. So becoming aware of those is great, and then becoming intentional about, okay, I want to use this because I recognize that there are those benefits. So putting people and planet before paper wealth, to me, looks like a future that has different types of currencies that are based in our values, you know, that care about people, you know, making sure that there's what Edgar Kahn, one of the founding fathers, you could say, of time banking, says there's no more throwaway people, you know. Everybody has something they can offer, some skill, some knowledge, even just their help or their presence. That's when you can have a time currency, a time unit or something that is at a living wage value. That is the way to achieve a universal living wage, is to have time banking be something that's totally ubiquitous, totally present in everything. Where no matter what, I know I can always default back into time credits, where my hour is worth somebody else's hour, and I can always go get somebody else's hour for an hour of whatever it is that I'm doing. You know, that's an hour for an hour. And that's, in many ways, what Paul Glover was striving to call to mind through the Ithaca hour, even though, in the end, it ended up not being a true time-based hour currency because of the relationship with the dollar. Currencies that are created to incentivize us, just like coffee cards and frequent flyer miles and all these other things, to incentivize us to go and be more responsible ecological actors, to go and take care of the planet, take care of our community, to go spend some time in the community garden, to go, you know, take care of the kids and teach them environmental values, to go clean up the watersheds. We can actually earn money by doing those things. Never mind that dollars right now aren't really paying people money for doing those things. That's, again, a reflection of the value set that's driving the dollar system. It's just not there. It doesn't think those things are important. In fact, it thinks quite the opposite is important. Privatize all the dollar profits, socialize all of the environmental and social costs. Have everybody else. Screw the environment, screw the people. Corporations want profits. It's just embedded in their DNA and that cultural DNA and the money system that supports it. So moving into the future and putting paper wealth back in service to people on the planet, we're going to start using those kinds of currencies, social currencies, environmental currencies, healthy currencies, to shift our relationship with money.
Scott, are there some examples of where that's happening?
Yes. Time banks are already a global presence. We have a time bank here in Tompkins County. There are time banks down in Brazil. There are time banks in San Francisco and all across the country, Europe, Russia, China, everywhere. You can start up a time bank anywhere. It's a free piece of software. You can light it up. People come in, they sign up for a profile. They list what they're good at. They list what they want, and then it's just a matchmaking thing. Time credits are available, and by the way, cash-free, tax-free. As long as you're in time credit space, where it's literally time for time, my hour for your hour, no taxes required, and that's through the IRS. So that's good.
You can Google it?
Yeah, sure. And there's Time Banks USA. You'll run into two main organizations in terms of time banking software. Time Banks USA, and the one that we use here, Our World. That's a little h, big O, ourworld.org. So they're the big freeware providers. There's a few others. And then environmental currencies. I mean, you can think of Hero Rewards as an environmental currency. I mean, I've got some merits back there in my notebook, so I can pass those around. But you know, we said we took the city of Fairfield in Iowa. They had their Go Green Strategic Plan 2020, and it was something that, you know, they'd worked on for like 5 years through a strategic planning consultancy. Sat down all these stakeholders in the community and said, all right, you know, let's look into the future. Let's put ourselves into the future, and what does that future look like? You know, what do we see in terms of infrastructure around us? What do we see in terms of relationships? What do we see in terms of incentive structures? Let's map all that out, and then let's create a step-by-step guide into how we want to get there. And so they did that. They got, you know, aims, objectives, specific goals and activities that they wanted to see more of that would move us, you know, start to steer the rudder in that direction. So I went through it line by line, and I said, could I issue merits for that? Yes, that applies. That doesn't apply. This applies. That doesn't apply. And came up with the whole list. And then I looked at the range of community events that were coming up for the next quarter. And any event that was speaking to or serving one of those activities was then a meritable event. So if you went to that event, I'd come and I'd be like, hey, I'm Scott, I'm doing this weird pilot thing and this thing called the Hero Awards program. I'm going to give you these merit things just for being here, just for being good citizens. And as a result of your coming here today, you can take these merit things to the businesses and get a special deal. The businesses want to thank you for serving the values behind the strategic plan. And just to see how it will work out. And so in that way, we were an environmental currency. And there have been other schemes that are working in that direction. I don't think that there are many outside of the transition currencies that are very explicit about the environmental focus there. There's some new ones that are coming online. They're very, very exciting. We're talking Bitcoin 2.0, 3.0 stuff that really, I mean, you know, that whole technology is on an accelerating curve thing. We're continuing to see that develop. Really fun stuff. So a currency, for instance, backed by permaculture. Anybody know what permaculture is? Permaculture is systems design for agriculture, whole systems design, so that you create a micro ecosystem that constantly perpetuates itself. Every waste stream is food for the next element. So everything is working in co-harmony with one itself. So but if you do it right, you don't need human hands. You know, the system will naturally produce, right? I'm sure there's a better definition of it that I don't know yet because I'm not permaculture certified, but people are becoming permaculture certified. So permaculture, triple bottom line businesses that are committed to reincorporating the social and environmental cost into their bottom lines. A currency just for people of that ethos. So that's how it's happening. Do I have another slide? I don't think I have another slide. I could be wrong. All right. Go deeper. These are some great books. Economics here is really fun. This is a comic book, actually. This is a graphic novel that talks about the history of economics. You go into the economics departments in our schools, in high school and in college, and I could not find anything that would give me an ordered structure to organize the evolution of ideas through economic history. And this does that. This does that really wonderfully. And I mean, seriously, I can hand it to my 11-year-old little brother, and he'd get it. It's a comic book.
What's it called again? I can't read it.
Economics, just like that, except as opposed to CS at the end, it's X. And then we have Rethinking Money here, written by Bernard Lietaer and Jackie Dunn. How new currencies turn scarcity into prosperity. And then we have The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. This is Charles Eisenstein's latest book. He wrote Sacred Economics and The Ascent of Humanity. Prolific writer. This man has a gift. This man has an incredible gift with the word. You know, I mean, you'll ask him a fairly simple question. He'll close his eyes, and in 20, 30 seconds, he'll come back at you with an essay. That's perfect prose. The guy like almost doesn't even need to proofread. And then Money and Life, the documentary, you can go find that on YouTube. I can circulate that link. I'm hosting screenings. If you guys would like to host a screening here, I'd be more than happy to come in and speak with people about that. Yes, sir.
Well, you said that this will be on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about this information, for example.
Yes.
The slides. Okay.
Yes. And you're welcome to go to this link, which takes you to a Prezi. It's kind of a zooming presenting space. It's kind of like a slideshow, but you can zoom in and out of it as well. It allows for a little extra flexibility. So you've got these slides there, and I'll be adding extra information, other YouTube talks that complement my own, and then other bits and pieces that will be of interest.
I just might mention that some people may have to go duties at the service, but otherwise we're legitimately in
Question and answer.
now.
Yes, yeah, we're done on the official I'm talking actually. Great, yes.
The other question was, are you available for in Chicago area, for example?
Sure.
Wherever.
Sure. I mean, I'm new to this whole thing, but I'm willing to take speaking situations. I mean, this is what I'm doing for my living, and I'd like to talk about the local currency scene because this is
Do
something
you have a
really
card?
exciting.
Do you have a card?
I do. I think I have a couple in my wallet. Don't have any in there, but I do have some in my wallet. Sure. Yes, sir.
You mentioned permaculture-based currency, and I've heard of something called solar coin,
Right.
which is also linked with the emergence of solar technology. We can imagine, as you said, many of these currencies proliferating by tying themselves to the kind of world that we would like to have.
Right.
There was some conceptual link that is missing in my mind because when you think about Ithaca currency or one of these other currencies, once you have this currency, the key question in my mind is liquidity. Can you exchange this particular currency for other kinds of currency?
Right.
If you cannot, that is, if you can only spend this money in particular ways but can't become liquid and exchange with other kinds of currencies, then you're still left with the problem of supporting drug dealing and anything else that someone wants to do with whatever currency that they can get.
Right.
So if I had Ithaca hours, who knows, maybe I can buy crack with Ithaca hours or something like that.
There's
We
no
really-
way to. No
We
way to
really
stop.
can't control this, right? Is that
Right.
Is that
Yeah, but you're not going to be able to control that anyway. If people want crack, they're
Then the question in my mind would be, isn't there a need for a currency exchange?
Yeah.
So what models are there for exchanging among these people in planet-oriented currencies?
That same one that's doing the permaculture thing, the core of their infrastructure is tailored to work in that exchange direction. I don't think that they're quite there yet, but the arc that they're on is a very healthy one and a very exciting one. And I actually just reached out to the guy who's running that. Just because I have all kinds of sensors out in the world to bring these things to me, and that picture with all the currencies on there, that's the top of my Facebook page. So if somebody comes to my Facebook page, they're like, oh, this guy does currency stuff. But very visibly out there in this field. So I reached out to him. He just sent out like his first or second email around what he's calling permacredits. It can get a little technical on how this stuff's working out, but they are working with some exchanges on how to allow people to trade in other currencies. Now, whether you want that even available, say we do another Ithaca system, do we want to allow people to earn here and then translate that purchasing power and go elsewhere? That's a question that you have to ask. I mean, because part of it is you actually want to keep that purchasing power in that area, and this is just coming from looking at the economy like a cake or an onion. There's different layers to it. There's the local area, there's the county, regional, state, Northeast U.S., the U.S., North America, all of these different layers. And the economy can happen, an exchange can happen at any one of these layers. One of our weak points in the economy today is that we have one thread that connects all of those. And if something goes wrong with that thread, then everything, that thread is the dollar. And if something goes wrong with the dollar in the dollar system, everybody who deals with dollars has a big problem. That's why these gambling addicts over in New York, we call them stock traders, they're really gambling addicts. That's why when they screw up, people in Iowa have a hard time getting food on the table. Logically, that's not how the world should work, right? These guys, if they make big bets and they lose, then they should pay. But instead, it's these farmers and these regular blue-collar families that are having a hard time making ends meet because these guys are jerks. So that's my personal opinion about it, but there used to be laws that separated what they do from the regular commercial banking services of American folk, Glass-Steagall. trying to make sure that I answered your question.
It's Facebook.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, all right. Just before I come to you.
Go ahead, but the follow-up I would have, if I had allowed a follow-up, would be that Bitcoin and some of the other software-based currencies are the latest in, like on the venture capital market.
Right.
There's a huge new wave of venture capital flowing into
Yes.
these alternative currencies.
Yes.
So one question is about how is the currency used, and the other is how is the currency backed.
Right.
So to some extent, any local currency must have an investment of time or money or dollars or whatever other kind of currency.
Yeah.
So I would explore that, but I won't ask.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, that's a great thing. And just to complement your earlier question, you said it's about liquidity, and that these guys are kind of missing this connection. The other connection that they're missing is that connection to community. That's one of my strongest criticisms of most of these, techno-enamored solutions, where they think technology, if I can just code it correctly, the world will self-correct. They'll just realize the brilliance of what I've done. But a perfect currency system with no users has no current. There's no current to see whatsoever. And those users here, they're in the room, they're down over there taking money in the till for coffee and bagels, right? So if I can't buy my bagel in your techno solution, who cares? I don't know. I want to buy my coffee. That's it. That's all I want in my life. I just want to go buy my coffee and use the Wi-Fi for a while, right? So the real point where all this theoretics meets the road, where the rubber meets the road, is the point of sale. The point of sale of the merchants. And a lot of people are overlooking that. They're really underestimating that, and it's a different proposition to bring this to a business owner. You got to get very real about the value, and it can't just be some abstracted. We've got a meetup group of 10 guys who use this currency, and they want to come through. You got to get out of the face. Don't waste my time. But we can contrast that with the local situation. I do want to move into that realm. Yeah.
I mean, your particular group is so moral, and your principles are so high. But the things that always concern me are the Brazilian situation and what happens with the dollar. I mean, things in Venezuela are just not going well at the moment. And so members of a family of a dear friend of mine go out of the country to get dollars. Because at the moment, I mean, something like this they couldn't even imagine. I mean, this is just way out of their realm of possibility. So they go out of the country, and that's their currency. They go out to get dollars. I shouldn't even say where they get the dollars, but then they bring them back in. And that doesn't, and they're professionals. But, I know other times when I've lived outside of the United States, people wouldn't even get paid for the longest times. And I used to always say, how do you live? That was amazing. But back to the Brazil situation, I mean, they've got a World Soccer Championship coming up fairly soon. And then down the road, they have the Olympics. So I'd be concerned to know whether or not that beautiful project that they started, in one place, whether or not something like that is continuing. I mean, they've had riot after riot after riot about the fact that the government is investing so much money in soccer stadiums and infrastructure and what we will see, on television, and not in the people. I mean, that's what you talk about, those people out there. And I think we're at the point in this country where the average person doesn't have a clue about what's happening in all the 50 states.
Right. Well, I think a consistent theme that we're seeing there is that faith in traditional power structures is kind of at an all-time low. Where whether you're in Brazil or you're in Venezuela or you're here in the U.S., it's very clear that those who have vested interests in the power structure of today have very little concern for the needs of the people they're supposed to be serving, right? Because, whereas Brazil is pouring millions and billions into all this entertainment infrastructure when people are going hungry and they can't get where they need to go. can't get the health care they need, whatever. Same thing's happening here in the U.S. We just gave it to the bankers, right? We just gave it to them instead. We didn't even get a stinking stadium, you know. So I can't speak to what's happening in Venezuela intelligently. I haven't looked too much into it. But what I do think that we're going to see is that people do trust the people that they can meet, you know, and interact with in daily life, and we share a desire for that more beautiful world, and we can come together in this room. We can talk about that, and we can, you know, meet together online, and we can talk about that. But we know that when it comes down to it, we're not talking about some abstract thing. We're talking about Stewart Park. You know, we're talking about the Cascadilla Creek and things that we want to do in our place, with our people, for our people. And it's that connection, again, to people and to place that makes these things truly viable, because it's that sense of the commons, sense of the commonwealth, and how we're moving back in service to that commonwealth as opposed to continue to perpetuate the older system. So in the event of a crisis, you know, and look, I don't mean to get doomy gloomy on you here, but it's not an if. It's not an if. It's a when we run into another 2008 moment. When we do that, it's math. Again, this isn't, you know, it's not really all that complicated once you get down to like the underlying driving principles of it and you look at the math of it. You're like, wait a second. Compound interest doesn't work on a finite plane of resources, right? And the way that this stuff's going, like when it pays money to have money, the people who have money are going to keep money, and the people without the money are actually paying that money to the people who have the money. And we pay those interest payments. They go to the people who already have the money. They don't need it. We need it. But I'll tell you something. In the UK, it's 3%. In the US, it's somewhere between 3 and 5% of the total money supply is in bills and coins, and is even down here on the commercial you and I use it sphere. 95 to 97% of all the money in existence is being used by these jerks with their gambling addictions.
Really quickly, what is the current state of things like at Ithaca Hours in Ithaca? I'm not even aware of where that's at.
That's a good question. When I came in, I didn't know what the situation was. I was originally asked to go find out by Green Star, because I've been looking for a job over there. I'm actually on Green Star Council. I'm ending that in early June. That's my last month. Next month is my last full month. And I really enjoyed being on council. It's been a very, very valuable experience for me in terms of seeing a very well-run, well-oiled governance machine. They've really got it fine-tuned, and they've got good people there. So I don't know what everybody's impression of the Green Stars are, but mine have been very good from that experience. Green Star has about $13,000 worth of Ithaca Hours. And Ithaca Hours is pretty much, in terms of circulation, at an all-time low, you know, prior to its inception, right? And that was 0. Right now, there's very little tiny trickles. It shows up as a blip here and there, but it's an anomaly, not anything that's a regular practice. After Green Star asked me to do some organizing, I was more formally introduced to Ithaca Hours board under the pretense that I would be able to come in as an organizer for them and help stir things up again, get things moving. So they asked me to do that, and I was like, okay, well, you know, if you want me to go and sell this, I need to know what I'm selling. So tell me about it. Tell me about Ithaca Hours. You know, what is it? What is Ithaca Hours? What is its purpose? What is it here to do? And how does it work? You know, these are the questions I'm going to have to answer, so I can know the answers. And there was really a shortage of understanding of even those core things. So I rapidly realized, wait a second. You guys don't have a marketing challenge. You've got an identity crisis. You don't know who you are. You don't know what you're doing. Those are important things. You know, you can't do without that. You cannot do this stuff without a driving core purpose and belief, and, you know, a knowledge of what the rules of the game are. So I tried to work and help them through that, and you know, started asking questions of, okay, you know, is there you know, would you guys be willing to adjust some things within the system? Because there are some structural issues within the system that have confused the public chiefly the name, frankly. Ithaca hour, place name, time unit. It implies that it's a time-based currency. I came here, I'm a currency dude. I thought it was a time-based currency. I thought it operated like a time bank. It's supposed to be an hour for an hour, right? Well, that worked in 1991 when the average wage of a worker in Tompkins County was $10 an hour. That worked. It's 2014. That's not the case anymore. You just got to be real with that. And you don't want to have some floating exchange rate thing. You don't want to have to negotiate at the point of sale about this value. So let's just choose our battles. Let's get people operating on the local regional thing. Let's not try to push them towards time banking. If they want to do time banking, they can do time banking. That's the best way to do that. You want to have the hour for an hour, do a time bank. But don't try to intermix the two. That's a big point of confusion. So in this new system that I'm designing, it would just be Ithaca dollar. Right? Keep it simple. One-to-one relationship with the dollar. Ones, fives, tens, 20s.
Wait, so you're currently working on this here?
I'm currently
So
organizing
it's
this.
being a new
Yes. Yes.
currency
And
is being developed?
Yes.
Is Bob Glover still around?
He's in Philadelphia. Yes, sir.
You touched on the power issue of power, and I'd like to know how that's being addressed along these lines. I mean, in other words, that the imbalance of power, which is associated with all of the imbalance and inequities of the circulation, and I'd like to just see where you would go, where you steer me to point to how that's being talked about and so on.
Right. The biggest concentration of power in a money system is determining the issuance cost. What is the money created for? Because new money that's created, newly created money, has a special power to it, right? Because it comes in at a certain valuation. And by the time it's all in there, there's a new valuation. Because there's more in it. So if we've got $1 million in the money supply, and I print another $1 million, I'm going to spend it at the valuation at that $1 million. But by the time I spend it all out there, the value of the original $1 million is going to be half, right? Now that's not, that can be a little misleading. So I just want to use that example to illustrate the power of new money. But that's not to say that creating new money always has that effect. Because you can say, well, this money is linked to this money, and we're going to track that value no matter how much is out there. And unless something goes horribly awry, then you can actually do that. So that's just to frame up that, like in the Ithaca dollar situation, we have a one-to-one relationship with the US dollar. Every note will be just like a Federal Reserve note. It's not legal tender. You're not forced to accept it for all debts, public and private. And it's not going to be, I'm not going to print it in such a way that it can be confused for Federal Reserve notes. I'm not going to get, the feds aren't going to come after me for counterfeiting. Don't worry about that. We know how to do this right. They're going to be very secure bills. A lot of fancy schmancy, anti-counterfeiting things that we can do on the bills themselves to keep people from going and running them off on their own scanners. Or like, those holographic stickers and other things. But in terms of that issuance strategy, that's a really important question, one that I've always been highly focused on. The end goal, just to cut straight to the chase, is to give that decision-making power back to the community who use it, right? So the community itself will decide how many to issue over a given period, a year, half a year, every quarter, whatever, and what to issue it for. And I've got, a fairly unique strategy on how to help make that happen while I still maintain a core of real goods and services, a core value that comes back to, that has a relationship with. So it isn't just, we want $1 billion, so we're going to issue $1 billion and we're just going to give it to everybody, and it's just going to end up being like, I'm swimming in this stuff, it's not worth anything. Even though, arguably, if we all just had that agreement, again, community agreement, medium of exchange, we just printed up $1 billion and gave everybody it and said, you can exchange this for goods and services on a one-to-one parity of the dollar, more economic activity would take place, more people would get fed and sheltered, and the economy would get jump-started. We could do it that way. Just print a bunch and hand them to everybody on an equitable basis.
I mean, that's where the issue of power comes into the picture, because, yes, agreement, but agreements are not just voluntary. They can be manipulated, structured, imposed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm saying that, I mean, you started to address the issue of power in terms of issuance, right? So that's your
ongoing
starting
governance
point. But is that sort of how is that the strategic direction?
Right.
Or is that just a starting point?
It's a great question. I want to structure this like a cooperative. This is where I've been ever since we did the hero rewards. The question was, okay, this time we got lucky. We got lucky because we had the Go Green Strategic Plan 2020, and that had an existing buy-in out of the community. So we could go tap that source of buy-in, and that validated all of these things that we wanted to issue units for. But Ithaca doesn't have that plan. I know they do, but let's say they do. How do we get that buy-in? How do we get how do we do that values discovery? How do we discover which direction the community wants to head in a way that's equitable, where everybody has a say and a voice? So I'd like to do this like a cooperative. That was after Hero Rewards that we created My Local Cooperative. That was the brand, My Local Cooperative. And we wanted to create a cooperative governance and ownership structure so that the people who were participating actually had an ownership stake in the infrastructure and a governance vote on how it was used. And that's something that many of these new systems are incorporating because that's clearly it's all about power of the people.
Yeah, I mean, to what extent do any of these books address that question? What you're talking about now, governance, ownership, and so on and so forth.
I wouldn't say that any of these do.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that any of these do. But I will definitely have a governance section on the present. So if you go there, now this thing is effectively just the slides that you saw and a bunch of other ideas of other stuff I want to include that's out of view, like you'll have to manually go hunt that down. But I will be expanding that. This is at the end of my TEDx talk, and hopefully when...
You give a TED talk? You give a TED talk?
I did, at TEDx Ithaca College recently.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll come to that YouTube in like 2 or 3 days.
I listen to them all the time.
Great.
I can tell we've got at least half a dozen more questions, but unfortunately we have to call time.